South, the series, is an audiobook production. It contains subject material not suited for a younger audience. Listener discretion is advised. South, the Pinewood High School incident, is the telling of an unfortunate soul, a young girl lost to the whims of society. We follow the story of Cassidy Learman, a Pinewood High School student, as she finds herself stumbling down a dark and dangerous path. In Allura Shores, corporations control your every thought. It is a place where governments decide where you live and who you talk to, where the best parts of humanity are stripped away, turning the innocent into the monsters we fear the most. The path of darkness is broad and inviting. A banquet of thieves ready to take all you have. Hold true to your beliefs. If you are not careful, someone will replace them with their own. Previously on South, the Pinewood High School incident, Cassidy follows through with her attempt to spy on Lydia and Elizabeth, meeting at the restaurant on the docks. Her effort goes smooth enough, barring a near disastrous fumble by Jerry, and she learns that the coven is set to attempt something at the homecoming game. After a brief battle with herself, Cassidy decides to tell the other witches about what she learned, and to her surprise, they all agree to take the information to Kimberly, the hope being that she will help the girls reveal the truth about the school and help them rid the coven of Southern Cut's hold on them. Later that day, the girls meet up to take their findings to Kimberly, but they are joined by a disheveled James, his lack of awareness causing Cassidy to grow concerned about what they are about to do. As it turns out, her caution was well warranted, the trip to Slayton being derailed by Cassidy being lulled to sleep by none other than Penelope. When she wakes up, Cassidy is bound and assaulted on the ground, while Heather stands over her to monologue about the reason behind the betrayal. It is discovered that James was enthralled by the other witches and was there to do their dirty work, that being to end Cassidy's life. Although doing her best to escape the attempting murderers, Cassidy is ultimately felled by James, who, in a similar state as her possession by the Ander demon, beats on her until she is unresponsive. Cassidy's death was no accident, and with the continuation of this story, one has to question who's going to stop the witches now from enacting their ritual on the masses at the football game. Let's get back into the story, where an unexpected turn of events are about to play out, for good or ill. Death didn't feel like she thought it would. She was adrift in the catacombs of eternity, the passage of time and space, losing any and all meaning with each conceptualized moment. Was it a moment? Or was it the remnants of her mind trying to make sense of death? Either way, it was of no significance to her. She had ceased to be. Everything that she had assumed was no more than a simple fiction. Right and wrong, good and evil, chaos and order. Nothing was anything anymore, and nothing else mattered. There it was again. Something in her was still there. It had managed to keep her thoughts going despite her attempts to stay dead. Even as she felt nothing, she was able to feel her thoughts, a frustration in the grand expanse of her eternal slumber. It was as if she wasn't allowed to enjoy an afternoon nap due to the light sounds of a radio playing too loudly. If she had arms, she would turn it off, but she didn't, did she? She tried to shift towards the noise and instantly felt her body, lightly and almost certainly numb, but it was still there. Her thoughts began to swim with more questions than she wanted, and realized, as soon as she felt the searing pain pulsing in her head, that she was still breathing. She was actually still alive. She might have screamed, most certainly she did, but she was still losing her sense of time. Whatever had happened to her wasn't as permanent as she thought it would be, but she wasn't completely unscathed from the ordeal. She felt and heard a lot of things in the time that she was drifting in and out of consciousness, primarily the voice of someone she didn't know. It was a male voice, and she felt him touching her, not in a gross abusive way, but he was helping her. She didn't see it happening, but based on how she was beginning to come to her senses, she understood that she was in someone's care. It felt like it was daytime, because when she had finally managed to maintain being alert, she slowly opened her eyes to the brightest interior she had ever witnessed in her life. It was as if James was still beating her, the dim lights of wherever she was only dimming after a few minutes. She forced her sight to focus a bit until she saw that she was in an abandoned building of some sort. It was definitely night, and there was graffiti on the dingy walls. Parts of the ceiling and floor were damaged and degraded, and the earthy smell of wet moss made her want to cover her nose. Before she could, however, she vomited due to her concussion. She lay back on the makeshift bed that was a large bundle of leaves covered with an abandoned sheet, and lost consciousness again. She didn't dream. A part of her wanted to have somewhere to escape to, but she was unable. Whatever they did to her was too traumatizing, too unreal for her to cope with. She was their victim, something that she felt would define her for the rest of her life, and she didn't know if she was going to be able to live with that. Now that she was alive, she was going to have to deal with confronting them somehow, never again able to live in peace. It was a bird that brought her attention back to the dilapidated building she was being taken care of in. The sun was light in the sky, and it had just rained, the trickling of water still finding its way into the unplanned skylight in the nearby section of the ceiling. She continued to lay there as the bird maintained its early morning conversation with her uninterrupted. That is, until she heard a shifting noise from somewhere nearby. Without giving it much more thought, Cassidy tried to sit herself up and found out quickly that she was still injured, her head feeling as though it was ready to split and expose her brain if she moved another inch. She managed to push past the pain, however, and inched herself upwards from the ground. Her movements were slower than she would have liked, but she managed to get to a seated position with relative quickness. She wasn't able to focus on her surroundings using her sight alone, so most of what she gathered was through her hearing, but it was becoming easier to understand her overall condition. Her head was covered in bandages. Some of the wrappings were obscuring her ears, and she had bruising around her neck and chest. If she were looking in a mirror, she knew that she would be crying. Part of her wanted to anyway, but there were too many questions to be puzzled out. One of them was answered a bit too fast for her to come to terms with. The figure of a taller, older man approaching from the other side of the space. "Oh, you're finally awake." The man's shaded figure and speed of approach caused Cassidy to react sharply. "Hey, don't freak out. I found you out in the sticks and you were pretty messed up. I brought you here because, well, why?" Cassidy struggled past the pain. "It's a long story," he began to regale her. "In short, we know the same person." "Why?" Cassidy couldn't stop herself from shedding tears. "Why didn't you let me die?" The man didn't say anything to her question. She assumed that he was like the others that clung to life, and instead motioned to her in a bid to check her bandages. She was extremely hesitant, but gave in when she thought on how vulnerable she was before waking up, and his attempt at care not extending to anything offensive. After her new doctor's examination, the man pulled away from her and walked back to where he was working previously. Cassidy didn't know what to do anymore and chose to draw her knees in close for an embrace. She stayed like that for some time until the man returned to her, this time bearing food. "It's not the best meal, but it should help keep you warm." He handed her a small plastic bowl with a very warm broth in it. "There was a time, a few days ago, where I would have killed for a camping set like this. Sorry, sweetheart. Try the soup. If you can stomach that, then we'll move on to the toast." "Jerry." Cassidy let the name slip from her mouth as she attempted the liquid meal. That's what she calls herself now. There was a slight look of disgust on his face at the mention. "Black woman, looks a bit older than 30, and wears braids, yeah? We have a history together. My name is Andrew, but my friends call me Chip. Was a cop. But I won't bore you with the details. I was scared when I found you. Your Jerry didn't let me know what was going on, or else I would have called for more help." Cassidy looked at him after taking her time with the broth. Each sip hurt, but she was willing to suffer through it if it meant getting an actual meal. He continued on about how he had picked her up and carried her for miles before stopping where they were. His detailed explanation of the events began to make her feel more at ease than she initially thought knowing them would. When he got to the part where he mentioned her losing control of her bladder, she looked away in embarrassment, but he continued anyway. "There was nothing else I could have done," he said while looking away. "Like I said, I would have taken you to the hospital, but—" "I know." Cassidy assured him that she knew who they were dealing with. Now here comes the uncomfortable part. Chip readied himself by leveling with her and crossing his legs. "Why were you out here? And why are you working with Jessamine?" Cassidy didn't feel like talking, but she felt that there was no denying her involvement any longer. She began her tale from her meeting with Jerry in school and continued up to the point where she acted as her spy. With her retelling of the events that led up to her assault, she began to see where the cracks were forming in her relationship with the witches. She told him about Amber and how Jerry had approached her with the means to find answers, even telling him about her dealings with her coven and their plans to expose the plot she uncovered. It had all seemed to be too much to believe, but it had seemed as though he was receptive to all of it. "So, she helped you sneak into the school for information?" he repeated as he pondered to himself. "It seems like she's still up to her antics." "I was told by my sisters that we were being used by the school. I needed to find out why she was taken, and I'm sure it starts there." Cassidy leaned into the conversation as she finished to see what Chip thought of her claim. It appeared that he took the information given and was cross-referencing it with his own database. She was patient while he did so, taking the time to catch her breath from the difficult task of speaking past the constant pain. She took the last sip of her broth and set the little cup on the ground next to her. When it had seemed like he was finished compiling the information, he returned to their talk with questions she wasn't expecting. "Do you want to know what happened?" he quickly rephrased. "Do you want to know how we met?" He began his tale at the beginning. Cassidy was treated to much of the filler she didn't ask for, but was unable to escape. He went on about his life as a cop a bit too long, as if she were to believe any of it, and fully detailed his relationship with a detective named Womack. It was quite boring, she thought, the constant going on about how the system he helped maintain had wronged him. She was going to say something, but before she could, he made a face at her lack of response and moved on with his point. "It wasn't until we began to get more trafficking cases that I was brought into the same task force as him and a few others. It didn't make any sense. Where there were originally maybe 6 or so cases a year, it spiked to nearly 20 a month. We were thinking that it was coming from the poor immigration policies, but that didn't add up quite right either. We were stuck for a while until—" "It was her, right?" Cassidy began to shift around in discomfort. "Yeah." Chip looked away from their conversation to think a bit. "She came out of nowhere, or at least it seemed like she did. She helped us track paper trails and cargo routes we would have needed to ask the FBI for. It was all illegal, sure, but we wanted faster answers. Chip lowered his head in what Cassidy thought preparation for heavier news. She was getting better at spotting when someone was going to tell her something horrible, and she didn't like it. She took a deeper breath to try and brace for it, but she quickly let it out and held herself. She needed to stop forgetting that she was still recovering from being assaulted. Chip returned to the conversation with a much more serious expression. His eyebrows narrowed as he focused on the floor at her feet. There was a cold case out in Slayton. We tracked 16 girls to a shipping container about to be sent overseas. Because we were operating illegally, we needed to be careful of how we moved. We were trying to get the search warrant, but Womack got cold feet. It's too risky, he said, but I wasn't having it. I rushed in with Jessameen's help and a few others. When we got there, Chip stopped himself and waited until Cassidy took notice. Were they dead? She assumed. We cracked the can and found 10 dead. He looked like he didn't want to continue. 4 of them were unresponsive but breathing, and 2 of them were barely conscious. I called it in to Womack. I was thinking that he would work out a way for us to get them without losing our jobs. We waited for rescue, but only Womack showed up. There was a call from higher up, and we were told to leave the scene immediately. He was sent to make sure that we did. Did you? Cassidy was sure she knew the answer. No. Chip was angry at the memory. Me and Womack fought over it. He bloodied me up pretty good, and when we were talking again, he made me clean up. It's bigger than us, he said. I called Jerry to help, and she did. The whole thing being swept under the rug. I quit after that, and, well, here I am. Cassidy took a moment to breathe after Chip's tale. Her attention split between the chill creeping into the dilapidated building and her pulse tapping her in her bruised face. She looked at him and wondered if anything he had said was true. There didn't seem to be a reason for him to lie, but what other angle could he be trying? Was he looking to garner sympathy from her? She decided to let her doubt go. It wasn't going to get her anywhere in that moment anyway, and allowed her trust in people to not completely evaporate. It seems like she did a lot to help you. Cassidy looked directly at him. She might be secretive, but she's effective, right? She's also a cyber criminal, Cassidy. Chip made sure to dash her hopes of dealing with an honest person. You found that out yourself. Listen, I'm not saying that you're wrong for wanting to find your sister. I'm not someone that can stop you from searching for the truth, but I feel like I need to warn you about who you're working with. She's in the business of buying and selling information. It doesn't matter to who, as long as she makes a profit. I said what I needed to say. I only hope that you aren't being used the way we were. What day is it? Cassidy asked randomly. It's Sunday, Chip said as he looked at his phone. Last full week of October. Why? Spirit Week. The cold had effectively settled in her heart. The homecoming game is coming up. Cassidy didn't sleep much that night, the constant reminder of the betrayal playing non-stop in her mind. She tried to stay warm, but there was no helping the leakage of air into the dilapidated building. She was uncomfortable and traumatized, scared and alone, even with Chip snoring loudly a few feet away. He was a good person, but that is what seemed to bother her the most. She fully expected someone of ill intentions to be working with someone like Jerry, but he didn't fit the mold. As she tried to force herself to catch at least an hour's worth of sleep, she wondered what type of person she was, what type of monster she was willing to become. They were awake before sunrise, Cassidy feeling a bit stronger than the previous nights as she arose from the cold floor of the old building. Although her body still ached, she felt fit enough to wander around the place while waiting for Chip to collect the campsite. Before they slept last night, Chip made a call to Jerry, who quickly forced him to put her on, to which she spent the majority of their conversation berating Cassidy for her lack of awareness. She then commanded them to travel to the main road where they could go their separate ways. Cassidy kept the tongue lashing on repeat in her mind as she took each step towards their objective. It was the fuel keeping her thoughts alight. Do you always look like that? Chip asked as they treaded over dirt and gravel. You look like you want to kill someone. Cassidy didn't answer. She knew what he was trying to do. She wouldn't have it any other way, however. Her anger needed to be aimed at someone, and she had 5 potential candidates. Chip didn't force her to answer, and the two continued along the path for another near hour before he decided to chime in again, this time to acknowledge their progress. They were nearing the midway point, and Cassidy was sure that she wasn't going to make it without taking a quick break. When they were seated on the side of the road, she closed her eyes to take in the meager sunlight. Hey. Chip sounded like he knew he was being annoying. I just want to say that I get it, you know? You're thinking about what you're going to do to them. I was on the force for a while, and I can say with confidence that you don't want to go down that road. It only ends one way. Have you ever had someone take all your power away? Cassidy's focus was on the light breeze flowing through the nearby trees. Have you ever had people around you toy with your emotions, only to beat you with them when you became inconvenient? No, but then you can't tell me what I want or don't want. She reopened her eyes and stared at the sky. This entire time, we were taught how to tap into the ancient and taboo. I trusted them with my heart, with my life, and they sacrificed me. For what? Money? Power? What was so important that they would kill me for it? At first, I wanted to know why. But I finally realize why I've been messing up. I get it now. None of this matters. This entire time, I've been trying to invite power, treating it like a friend I wanted to spend time with. But power is a slave, looking for a master. Chip kept his eyes on her as she leaned into her knees. She looked like a simple girl in that moment, unbothered by the chaos around her, but they both knew better. It was uncanny how just a few days ago she was near death, her life returning to her in such a short period of time. Everything about her was not normal, and when she stood to continue their journey, the evidence of the observation made itself clear. I'll take it back from them. I'm the master. I told you before how that road ends. Chip chose to spit at Cassidy's confirmation before returning to the confrontation. What are you planning to do? Storm back into the school, grab your nearest attacker and start beating on them? That's reckless, Cassidy. The world doesn't work like that anymore. You're wrong. Cassidy started walking. The world works the way it always has. We try to ignore it by hiding behind consumptions and social media posts. They showed me that when they chose to kill me. Cassidy, wait. Chip fought himself for the right thing to say. You don't have to play that game. You could go to the cops and do things the right way. You said it yourself, Officer Andrew. Cassidy turned to face him. The police are corrupt, so why would I trust them with something like this? No. I was given the power to change my life, and I gave that up. I'm going to take my power back, find my sister, and we'll leave this hell behind us. You don't even know where to start looking, girl. He tried to approach her, but she turned away to escape the confrontation. You don't know what you're doing, Cassidy. I don't need your opinion, Chip. They said nothing else as they continued their walk. Chip kept to focusing on the road while Cassidy took in the scenery. She couldn't care less about what he thought about her situation. All that mattered was getting Amber home and confronting the witches. Since she was kicked out of the coven, however, what did that mean? Was she still a witch? Was it worth claiming to be one? Regardless, her focus was set, and she was sure to find the answers to her questions at the end of the path. When they walked onto the main road, they set their gaze to the nearby shopping center that was still a mile off. By this time, Cassidy was exhausted, but she kept moving. He could have left her at that point, she thought, but Chip was steadily waiting on her like a doting father, the thought causing Cassidy to frown. When they finally made it to the shopping center where Amber was kidnapped, Cassidy looked on at the sunlit parking lot and sighed while Chip made the call. She wanted to remember Amber's face like it was when they were enjoying their time together, but the only image of her that she could manage was of sheer terror. Yeah, I know. She'll be waiting in the nearby restaurant. She was sure it was Jerry on the other end. When he was finished, he ended the call and looked in the same direction as her before trying to speak. She knew what he wanted to say, but her mind was already made up. She had done so the moment she was cast aside by the witches. Although she didn't know what she was going to do with them exactly, she knew that she couldn't let it slide. The offense needed to be answered with the same amount of malice as they projected onto her. "You can still go home, kid." Chip's eyebrows narrowed as his thoughts ran. "I can help you get out of this with your sister. I can get a few of my cop buddies to look further into this. I was going to do that anyway. But we could work together the right way. I wanted to finish out high school normally." Cassidy stopped herself from spiraling. "It would be different if they didn't try to kill me. I'm sure that they're responsible for Amber's kidnapping too somehow. They used the coven to try and get rid of me. The school, the coven, Amber. I need to handle this on my own." Cassidy stopped herself before tears fell, and the two of them remained silent until Chip's phone went off again. The older man looked at his notification and sighed, signaling the end of their journey together. Before he parted from her, however, he placed his hand on her shoulder and gave a slight nod. She didn't know how to respond to the gesture. An awkward grin escaped her as she nodded in return, and kept it plastered on her face as he removed it and began to leave her to her destiny. "You'll need to charge your phone." "I know. I'll ask someone while I wait." "Give me your number. If I find out anything, I'll..." "Yeah." She gave it to him. "Make sure you find somewhere safe to sleep at night." He was a bit further from her at this point. "The streets get cold at night. Trust me, I know." "I have some places I can go." Chip focused on her a while longer before releasing a sigh and taking a few steps away from her. He stopped to take a last look at her, still staring at the parking lot with her fists clenched, trapped in her mind as the world spun around her. He seemed to wonder what else he could say to persuade her away from walking into Jerry's trap, but nothing else was said. He made his way down the road, past the gas station, just before the entrance to the shopping center, and down the road leading out of her life. When she was finally alone, Cassidy walked towards the fast food restaurant that she would visit with Amber during their shopping trips, and entered as the sun fell behind some clouds. She managed to ask an employee that seemed to be bored with their task for their charger, and sat for a few hours until her phone was charged to full. After returning the phone, she was met with a free bag of food that someone didn't want, and a flood of missed calls and messages from her mother and Arthur. She waited until she was finished with her food before reading the messages, each of them containing varying degrees of concern and worry. When she had enough, she thought to herself if she should call them, but ultimately decided against it. They would only get in her way, after all. It took a bit longer than she expected, the darkening sky cueing her to start looking to make her way towards her next stop. Only she didn't know where that would be. She hadn't heard anything from Jerry since turning her phone back on. Something she was sure wasn't going to be a problem, but there she was, in the middle of Cadmart, staring at the electronics. She was following the exact path her and Amber took The night she was taken, she was by the baby aisle when her phone rang, the cat jingle she was once ecstatic to hear, now making her shiver with anxiety. I trust Chip didn't say anything too revealing about me. There were no sounds where Jerry was, a quiet that seemed uncharacteristic. I hope you've learned to listen to me now. Yeah. Cassidy, over the course of the last few days, lost all of her energy to fight back. If that's true, then I need you to pay attention to what I found. Jerry began to pace around where she was. First thing, the coven was what we thought it was, a PR arm of Cadwell Company. Their goal is to persuade the opinions of their target demographic into buying where they want them to buy. But Cassidy's concern began to grow as she thought back on her actions. Why us? Why the school? It's like Amber found out, probably before they got to her. Jerry didn't see how Cassidy's face looked at the mention of Amber's name. They needed a place to test out their methods. Where else better than a bunch of hormonal teenagers? It's the perfect test bed for social reactions. They'd hype you up with promotional material and get you to think the way they want you to before making a problem that only they can solve. Sound familiar? Cassidy thought on how easily she was swayed into joining the coven. How they probably used her dad's death and her reaction to it to get her invested. She fell so deep into the coven's maw that she was basically their chew toy, used on a whim and discarded when she became too much of a problem for their status quo. She didn't realize how angry she was until she found herself clearing a display of infant toys by swiping her arm quickly through it. Her breathing became heavy as she looked on at the mess and quickly walked away from the scene. She made her way to the front of the store to leave, the entire way being filled with more of Jerry's revelations. Cassidy, that's not all. Jerry wasn't planning on stopping. You weren't picked for the coven randomly. That decision was made when your dad began to bump up against the Cadwell Company and their plans for expansion. Cassidy stopped short of the entrance and nearly dropped her phone. It was all making sense. Her constant pill use and how her mood never seemed to improve. Her constant appetite and the way certain other foods she loved before now tasted gross. There was also her relationship with the Yander demon. It seemed as though Jerry was on the same page and instantly mentioned what she feared. She listened as Jerry expounded the truth of the entity she had previously gotten used to having control her body. It wasn't what you thought, huh? Jerry seemed to be mocking her somehow. From all the footage I saw from the school incident and your little display downtown, I can see why you'd enjoy having something like that inside of you. You weren't able to see it, but you looked like you were enjoying the experience. To answer your question about it, no, it wasn't some spirit or whatever, but a reaction to an external emission. Amber mentioned it before, didn't she? Cassidy nodded as if Jerry could see. Isotope 347 was changed to not only target bacterial strands in meat, but hormonal production. Didn't you think it weird that you were healing abnormally fast from your more serious wounds? What about your stronger than average strength and speed? All of it was a manipulation, Cassidy. You were pre-selected from the start, probably because of your dad's status, maybe because your desperate attempts to end it all, or maybe it was random. You were a slave to the system from the start, Cassidy. The Blackroot Coven, Pinewood High School, and even the Cadwell Company has been using you for their purposes, and you fell for it every step of the way. Jerry stopped talking to allow Cassidy to drift through her mind. She was angry, but there was a deeper sadness that made the rage she wanted to express take a seat for the moment. She wanted to ask Amber how she really felt about their relationship, if she really saw her as a sister despite not being able to help her. She wanted to ask Jessica more about how she overcame her desire to end things on her own. But they weren't there. They were all victims of the system. 3 young women that were moved on a chessboard they had no idea existed. It seemed as though, even if they found out one thing or the other, they were still oblivious to the main manipulation at play. She left the store and made her way towards the main road, Jerry still on the other end of the line, as if waiting to hear her respond. Cassidy didn't want to say anything, however, choosing to remain in her mind to wrestle with all the things she'd been exposed to in the last few months. She reached the main road near where she split from Chip earlier and sat on the curb. As the last slivers of daylight left the city, she pondered what she was going to do to them. Who was she going to approach first? She knew where each of them lived, and she was sure that they knew that as well, but she was going to need to do something. "I know what you're thinking, Cass," Jerry finally spoke up. "There's one last thing. I found Amber." A spark of hope briefly lit up the darkened street when she heard that. She was so depressed at first that when the news came, her heart felt as though it were kicked by the words. She wanted to ask so many questions, but as she prepared to do so, she was suddenly brought down by the lack of enthusiasm in Jerry's voice, and a dark thought pierced her revived soul. She began to breathe heavily again. Even though she didn't hear the confirmation, she somehow knew what she was going to hear. She began to cry as she mouthed the words she wanted to ask. Jerry met her halfway and shared what she had feared since her sister and best friend was taken from her. "She's dead, Cassidy." Jerry didn't pad the blow. Amber was killed by her traffickers in North Point, Slayton. Now that Cassidy is revived with a new lease on life, she takes her first steps toward the resolution she thinks she seeks. With Jerry as a guide, I wonder where she's going to lead our young protagonist. There are a lot of dangerous corners in Allure Shores. Thank you for listening to South, the Pinewood High School Incident. If you are enjoying this series, please leave a like, follow, and comment in the appropriate areas. We're nearing the end of the book, so I would like to thank you all very much for your dedication to listening to my work. This is a 10-part book series, so there will be more content in the future, Lord willing. So let's get comfortable. I will be changing how I release my chapters after this book, so get ready for some quality of listening changes soon. You can follow me on X at the writer Wesley, YouTube at Wesley the Writer, and I'll be updating my email soon, so get ready to flood my inbox. Music and sounds that are heard in this podcast come from freesound.org, pixabay.com, and FesleyanStudios.com. Thank you again, and I can't wait to continue our story next time. Until then, remember, the mind is the battleground. Be careful which side you give aid. Catch you later.